Hi and welcome to this second in a series of videos which are designed to help you get started on the GCSE Computer Science Programming project. And you can see from the title of this lesson that we're going to be starting to think about the design process and looking at computational thinking. And that's really what we're going to start with. We're going to have a little reminder of what computational thinking actually is, because it's what you're going to need to be doing certainly this week and over the next couple of weeks as we start to put a design together for the project that you're going to make. So here's a definition of computational thinking, and this tells you what computational thinking is. And it's also important to realize what computational thinking isn't. Computational thinking is not thinking like a computer, because computers can't think. We could have a big debate about that, very interesting debate about AI, etc. But for all intents and purposes, we're going to say that computers really can't think, and computational thinking is about problem solving and breaking problems down in such a way that a computer can carry out a solution and that we can instruct a computer how to carry that solution out. So one thing that's very, very important is approaching the project in a methodical and a structured way. What we don't want you to do, what I don't want to see you doing, is just immediately starting to plan how you're going to solve the project, what program you're going to write, and starting to produce a listing. That's not really going to lead, or probably won't lead, to the production of a very good or successful piece of work, because this is the largest piece of work really you will have had to do. So it's really important that you approach it in a sensible way. And indeed, real developers would work in the same kind of way. They wouldn't just sit down in front of the computer and start programming. An enormous amount of thought and planning would go into this to make sure that they approach it in the appropriate way, using the appropriate methods. So you can see that, or hopefully you can remember, that there are four cornerstones of computational thinking: pattern recognition and abstraction. But the two in red are the ones really that we're going to be concentrating on in GCSE, which is decomposition and algorithm design. And these two things will appear in your project. You will need to go through both of these phases. So decomposition is the thing that we're going to start looking at to begin with. And what's important to remember is that is actually decomposition is the idea of breaking a problem down into smaller chunks so that it is then easier to approach how to solve each one of those smaller chunks. And actually, decomposition is a really useful real-world idea as well. And we're going to look at a couple of examples just to give you an idea of what a decomposition might look like for a problem. First, we'll do it for a real-world problem, then we'll do it for a computer science problem. So here is an example, making a movie. Okay, so the idea of making a movie is a large undertaking, as you can probably imagine. An awful lot of things are involved, and if you are going to write a book on how to make a movie, it'd be a very long book with a lot of very, very complicated instructions and things to do. So before you even approach a project like this, you would start to break that down. So you would start to think, what does making a movie involve? What are the main tasks or smaller jobs or chunks that I can break this problem down into to make this a little bit more manageable? You might want to have a quick think about that and even pause the video, and then I'll show you some possible suggestions in a minute. So how could we chunk down making a movie and put it into smaller tasks, more manageable tasks? Well, here we are. These are three possible ways that we could break down making a movie into smaller ideas or smaller chunks. So we could say, okay, I need to do pre-production. So I'll need to do some stuff before I start actually making my movie. Then I can produce and actually make the movie itself. That's my next set of jobs. And then I'm going to do post-production. When I've finished making the movie, I will still need to do some work on it before I've finished this overall task of making a movie. So I've broken it down into three chunks. Now, obviously, at the moment, they're still quite large chunks. Each one of those jobs is still quite a big job. So what would be helpful is if I could break it down even more, if I could apply even more decomposition to each one of those jobs. And so this is what I might do. This is how I might break those down further. And you can see actually that I've broken down each one of these into differing numbers of different amounts of subtasks or smaller tasks. And it's not to say that this is a correct solution, but it's an example of how it might work. So I might decide that before I can do in pre-production means I'm going to have to write a script. I'm going to have to find the crew that I'm going to need to shoot my movie and audition and cast the actors. And then I'm going to need things like locations, sets, and props to be built and decorated and designed before I can start making the film. So I've broken down pre-production into 3 smaller tasks. Then I've said for production, well, really that is just shooting the movie, but there's a lot of work to do even afterwards in post-production. I need somebody to write and perform the music, the soundtrack. I need special effects to be done, and sound effects as well for that matter. The movie needs to be edited properly, and then even when it's put together, it needs to be promoted, got posters and trailers and stuff like that ready before it goes into cinema. So I've broken this down into considerably kind of smaller chunks now. And what I could do, I'm not going to, but I could break this down even further. So each one of these might have a series of tasks underneath it, which would be broken down into more and more and more chunks. And the more chunks we can do, and the smaller each one of these jobs is, the easier it will be to decide how we're going to go about doing it. And that's an important distinction to make at this point. Remember that decomposition doesn't tell us how to do anything. It just tells us what we have to do. So decomposition is what, not how. That's really, really important. So you're not creating a solution. You're not writing a list of steps or creating an algorithm that you're going to follow. You're simply saying, this is what I have to do. Okay? So it's what, not how. Which means that even if at the moment you're already thinking ahead and thinking, I don't really know how I'm going to write this program, it doesn't really matter, because this is just about you identifying what you're going to have to do. So let's apply the idea of decomposition to a real computer science problem. Here is an example of a GCSE project scenario from a few years back. Now, this is where I'm going to want you to kind of pause the video slightly so that you can maybe have a little think about this and do this along the same time as me. So you could see, here's a scenario. It's just like the ones that you've been looking at for yours. How could we break this scenario down into the main tasks that we need in order to complete it? So this might be a good time to just pause the video, read that little scenario there, and maybe jot down what you think the main tasks might be. Okay, so hopefully you've had time to do that and break it down into chunks. Let's have a look at some possibilities. So what I thought, and again, you might have thought different ones than me, but this is only an example, so it doesn't really matter. On the basis of this, I would need to have some code to create a user account, then validate that account when it's set up. You need to handle somebody logging into that account, storing it in a file. It needs to recommend films based on the genre. The user needs to choose the preferences they've got for the films they want to watch and make and display recommendations. So these from here, this is what I've identified as being the 2, 4, 6, 7 main tasks that I can decompose the main job into. Okay, so once I've identified those, I can start to produce what we call a decomposition diagram to represent this more clearly. And you've already kind of seen an example of what this might look like already with my previous example. So remember, what this tells you here, what each one of these tells you, is what the problem involves. At no point am I saying how I'm going to do it. I'm saying you need to create an account. It doesn't give you any clue how that's going to be done. So I have not tried to design or implement that solution yet. I don't want you to do that just yet. Okay, what I do want you to be able to do is produce this as a sample decomposition. So this is how we might go about that process. So your next task would be to produce a numbered diagram representing your decomposition, and this is important. I'll show you how that's going to work. Each task would be numbered, and you'll do this yourself. Then you could start to plan and design the algorithm to show you how you would solve each task. So the algorithm and the design, which we'll look at another time, is based on your decomposition. So we might end up with something like this. Here are all of my jobs down the side, and you can see that what I've done is I've actually started to put those down even in further. Well, really what I've done, I haven't broken down further, but I've grouped them to make it clearer how they are constructed. So if you look here, each of these slightly pinky colored boxes is one of my main tasks. So I've got login, manage the film information, and recommendations in, and I've numbered each one of those. Yeah. Then I've got under each heading the numbered tasks in the heading. So I know that for logging in 1.0, creating an account is 1.1, validate details is 1.2, check username passwords is 1.3. All of those tasks are part of 1.0. So that's my way of showing that all of those tasks are related together. And then I've done the same under here for managing film information is 2.0. So data entry, genre selection, and viewer preferences 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and the recommendation engine is 3.0, and making and displaying recommendations I number accordingly. So the numbering sequence you use is really, really important because it shows really how you're going to structure your decomposition and which tasks or which tasks belong to which kind of main task, how you grouped and organized it. So you're going to produce something like that. It might be that yours ends up looking more like this that I did here, and you can imagine that that would be making a movie might be our main task 1, and then I might have 2.0 there, 3.0, 4.0, and then 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. Depends how you want to do it. It doesn't really matter as long as you do number these boxes. You can always come back to this video and see how I've done it if you want a reminder. But that's what a decomposition looks like. It's also worth pointing out to you that look how the lines work. If I look how the lines and the symbols are used on it, they're very, very, very simple. We're not producing a flow chart, we're producing a decomposition. So all you use is a rectangle to represent the task and a line to connect it. You don't draw arrows because arrows go on a flow chart. You just draw a straight line to connect it, and I've used color to differentiate between the different, again, to show clearly how the different tasks are related to each other. So hopefully visually that looks really, really clear, and it's obvious how those tasks will be carried out and which task belongs to which. So that's what I need you to be able to do for your project. You have got a scenario like this one, and your job is to break that down into chunks, and for each chunk decide how it's going to look and put together a diagram that looks something like this. Okay, so the pink boxes show the main task. The numbering reflects which tasks have to be done for the main tasks, and remember we use lines, not arrows. This is not an algorithm, it's not a series of steps. If your deconstruction starts to have different phases of how that problem is going to be solved, you're doing it wrong. So what I want you to do this week is hopefully relatively simple. I need you to produce a decomposition for the project that you've chosen to do. I think that you're going to need to use a minimum of 10 stages or 10 boxes or 10 subtasks or 10 chunks, whatever you want to call it. But I'd expect at least 10 of these boxes in your diagram if you've broken it down sufficiently. You should use a numbering scheme in the same way that I have. Okay, and there's reasons why I want you to do that, but I would like you to make sure that you do that, please. And I would highly recommend that you use Lucid Chart, which I think you've used before, but it's very, very straightforward. If you've not used it, you can sign up with your Google login, and it's perfect for this kind of work. And I'll leave a link on the Google Classroom for you so that you can access Lucid Chart easily. And then when you've finished your diagram, it should take you a while to do, you can insert it into your main project workbook. So hopefully that's nice and clear. Remember, we only want a deconstruction. We do not decomposition. We don't want you to start to think about how. So this is all about what you have to do and not how. So if you need to recap any of this video, please do. And I'll set this next set of work for you next week. and good luck with your decomposition.